9-year-old Sophie held up a sign saying "My Last Song" at Eric Clapton's concert. When Clapton read it, he made a decision that left 22,000 people sobbing uncontrollably. It was May 17, 2019, and the Royal Albert Hall in London was buzzing with anticipation for Eric Clapton's concert, part of his I Still Do world tour. Among the 22,000 people filling every seat in the historic venue was 9-year-old Sophie Martinez, sitting in the front row with her parents, Maria and Carlos, clutching a handmade sign that read, "This is my last song. Brain cancer. Sophie, age 9." Sophie had been fighting an aggressive brain tumor called glioblastoma for 8 months. Despite multiple surgeries, chemotherapy, and radiation treatments, the doctors had delivered the devastating news just 2 weeks earlier. There was nothing more they could do. Sophie had perhaps 2 to 3 weeks left to live. But Sophie wasn't like most 9-year-old girls. While other children her age were interested in dolls, games, or social media, Sophie had fallen in love with music, specifically with Eric Clapton's guitar playing. Her father, Carlos, a musician himself who played in local bars around their home in Manchester, had introduced Sophie to Clapton's music when she was just 5 years old. "Listen to this, mija," Carlos had said, playing Lila for the first time. Sophie had been mesmerized by the guitar solo, asking her father to play it over and over again. As she grew older and began learning guitar herself, Eric Clapton became her hero, her inspiration, the musician she dreamed of meeting someday. When Sophie was diagnosed with brain cancer in September 2018, music became even more important to her. During the long hours of chemotherapy, she would listen to Clapton's albums on repeat. During painful procedures, she would hum "Wonderful Tonight" to calm herself. When the treatment made her too weak to play her own guitar, she would listen to "Tears in Heaven" and imagine herself playing alongside her hero. The doctors had been honest with Sophie about her condition from the beginning. She knew she was very sick, and she understood that her illness was the kind that sometimes didn't get better. But instead of becoming depressed or angry, Sophie had approached her situation with a maturity and grace that amazed everyone who knew her. "I want to make a list," Sophie had told her parents 3 weeks before the concert. "All the things I want to do before I have to go." The list was short and heartbreakingly simple. She wanted to see the ocean one more time. She wanted to have pizza with her best friend, Emma. She wanted to tell her grandmother she loved her. And at the top of the list, written in her careful 9-year-old handwriting, was "See Eric Clapton play guitar." Carlos and Maria had immediately begun trying to make Sophie's wish come true, but Eric Clapton concert tickets were expensive and hard to find. The closest show was at the Royal Albert Hall, and by the time they started looking, all the tickets were sold out. Maria posted about Sophie's situation on social media, sharing her daughter's story and her wish to see Eric Clapton before she died. The post was shared thousands of times and eventually reached Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a pediatric oncologist in London who had been treating children with cancer for 15 years. Dr. Walsh had seen too many children like Sophie, and she had learned that sometimes the most important treatment wasn't medical. It was hope, joy, and the fulfillment of simple wishes that reminded sick children they were still alive and loved. Without hesitation, Dr. Walsh purchased 3 front-row tickets to Eric Clapton's concert and sent them to Sophie's family with a simple note: "Every child deserves to see their hero. With love, a fellow music fan." When the tickets arrived, Sophie cried, not from sadness, but from pure joy. Despite everything she was going through, despite the pain and the fear and the uncertainty, she was going to see Eric Clapton play guitar. Sophie spent the week before the concert preparing. She practiced playing Lila on her guitar until her fingers ached. She listened to every Eric Clapton song she knew, studying the guitar parts and imagining what it would be like to hear them performed live. Most importantly, she made the sign. "I want him to know," Sophie explained to her parents as she carefully wrote out the words with colored markers. "I want him to know that this is special for me." Carlos had been reluctant about the sign at first. He worried it might be too much, too dramatic, too likely to upset other concert-goers who were there to enjoy the music. But Maria understood what Sophie was trying to express. "She wants him to know that his music matters," Maria told Carlos. "She wants him to know that what he does means something to people like her." On the night of the concert, Sophie wore her favorite dress, a blue one with little flowers that her grandmother had bought for her 7th birthday. She was visibly weak from her most recent round of treatments, and Maria had to help her walk into the venue, but Sophie's excitement was unmistakable. The family arrived early and found their front row seats. Sophie was amazed by the size and grandeur of the Royal Albert Hall, by the thousands of people filling the venue, by the massive stage where her hero would soon appear. "Is this really happening, Papa?" Sophie asked Carlos, using the Spanish nickname she had called him since she was little. "Yes, mija," Carlos replied, fighting back tears. "This is really happening." When Eric Clapton walked onto the stage at 8 p.m., the crowd erupted in applause. Sophie stood on her chair and clapped as hard as she could, her small hands barely making a sound compared to the thunderous ovation from 22,000 people. Eric looked exactly like Sophie had imagined he would, dignified, calm, with his guitar ready to create the magic she had been listening to for years. He opened the concert with Badge, then moved through Crossroads and White Room, each song building the energy in the room. Sophie was transfixed. She had never experienced live music on this scale before, had never felt the way the sound seemed to fill not just the venue, but her entire body. Every guitar note seemed to vibrate through her chest, every melody seemed to speak directly to her heart. For the first hour of the concert, Sophie forgot about her illness, forgot about the treatments, forgot about everything except the pure joy of watching her hero perform the music that had become the soundtrack to her young life. It was during Layla, Eric's most famous song, that Sophie decided to hold up her sign. Eric was in the middle of the extended guitar solo that had made Layla legendary when he happened to glance down at the front row. His eyes immediately locked onto Sophie's sign, and as he read the words, "This is my last song, brain cancer, Sophie, age 9, his playing became less certain, his focus clearly shifting from his guitar to the small girl holding the handmade sign. Eric continued playing, but everyone in the front rows could see that something had changed. His expression had become more intense, more emotional, and he kept looking down at Sophie as if trying to process what he had just read. When the song ended, instead of moving on to the next number as planned, Eric set down his guitar and walked to the front of the stage. He knelt down, bringing himself closer to Sophie's eye level, and spoke directly to her through his microphone. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Eric asked, his voice gentle and clearly audible throughout the venue. "Sophie," the little girl replied, her voice barely audible but picked up by the microphones because of the complete silence in the hall. "Sophie," Eric repeated, and somehow when he said it, her name sounded like music. "I see your sign. Is that really true?" Sophie nodded solemnly, still holding up her sign so Eric could see it clearly. The Royal Albert Hall, filled with 22,000 people just moments before buzzing with post-song energy, had become completely silent. Everyone in the venue had heard the exchange, had seen the sign, and was beginning to understand what was happening. "How old are you, Sophie?" Eric asked. 9, Sophie replied. "And you like music?" Sophie's face lit up with a smile that could be seen throughout the venue. "I love your music. My papa taught me to play Layla on guitar." Eric stood up and looked out at the audience, then back down at Sophie. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of decision, of a moment that everyone present would remember forever. "Sophie," Eric said, "would you like to come up on stage with me?" The crowd erupted in applause, but it was different from typical concert cheering. It was supportive, emotional applause, the kind that happens when people recognize they're witnessing something extraordinary. Security personnel quickly arranged for Sophie to be brought onto the stage, with Maria accompanying her daughter. As Sophie walked across the stage toward Eric, still carrying her sign, the applause continued, building into something that felt more like a celebration of life than a typical concert response. When Sophie reached Eric, he knelt down again and spoke to her quietly, away from the microphones. The audience watched this private conversation, understanding that they were witnessing something sacred, something that transcended entertainment.
After a moment, Eric stood up and addressed the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I want you to meet Sophie. Sophie is 9 years old, she's been learning to play guitar, and she's here tonight because she loves music. Sophie is also fighting a battle that no 9-year-old should have to fight." He paused, looking down at Sophie, who was standing beside him, looking both nervous and thrilled to be on stage with her hero. "Sophie," Eric continued, "would you like to sing a song with me?" Sophie nodded eagerly, and Eric guided her to a chair that a roadie had quickly placed center stage. He picked up an acoustic guitar and sat down beside her. "What would you like to sing?" Eric asked. "Wonderful Tonight," Sophie replied without hesitation. It was the song that had helped her through countless difficult nights in the hospital. Eric began the gentle opening chords of Wonderful Tonight, and after the first few notes, he began to sing. But when he reached the first chorus, something magical happened. Sophie began singing along, her young voice blending with Eric's experienced vocals in a way that was both heartbreaking and beautiful. As they sang together, the audience began to join in. Quietly at first, then more confidently, 22,000 people began singing Wonderful Tonight along with Eric Clapton and a 9-year-old who was fighting for her life. The song became more than a performance. It became a moment of collective human connection, a shared experience of love, hope, and the power of music to bring people together in the face of life's most difficult challenges. When Wonderful Tonight ended, Eric looked at Sophie and made another spontaneous decision. "Sophie," Eric said, "I'd like to play one more song for you. This is a song I wrote a long time ago about someone very special to me who had to go away too soon. It's called Tears in Heaven." As Eric began the opening notes of Tears in Heaven, a song he had written after the death of his young son, the emotional weight of the moment became overwhelming for everyone in the venue. This wasn't just a performance, it was a musical prayer, a moment of spiritual connection between an artist and a child who understood loss and love in ways that most people never have to experience. Sophie sat beside Eric as he played, occasionally singing along with lyrics she knew by heart. Her presence seemed to give Eric's performance an even deeper emotional resonance, as if he was playing not just for the audience, but for every parent who had ever feared losing a child, for every child who had ever faced something too big and scary to understand.
When the song ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the Royal Albert Hall. 22,000 people were crying, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming beauty of what they had just witnessed. Eric hugged Sophie gently and spoke to her one more time through the microphone. "Sophie, thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for reminding all of us what music is really about. You were the bravest person I have ever met." As Sophie was helped off the stage and returned to her parents, the audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted for nearly 10 minutes. It wasn't just applause, it was an expression of love, support, and recognition for a little girl who had shown extraordinary courage in the face of extraordinary circumstances. The concert continued for another hour, but everyone knew that the evening's most important moments had already happened. Eric's subsequent songs were dedicated to Sophie, and several times throughout the rest of the show, he would look over at her in the front row and smile. Video footage of Sophie's time on stage spread across social media within hours of the concert's end. By the next morning, millions of people around the world had seen the 9-year-old girl singing Wonderful Tonight with Eric Clapton and had heard her story. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Donations began pouring in to help cover Sophie's medical expenses and to fund research into pediatric brain cancer. Musicians from around the world recorded tribute videos for Sophie. Most importantly, several experimental treatment options that had previously been financially out of reach suddenly became available. 3 weeks later, Sophie began an innovative immunotherapy treatment that had shown promise in similar cases. Against all odds, her condition began to stabilize, then slowly improve. Eric Clapton stayed in touch with Sophie and her family throughout her treatment. He sent her signed guitars, arranged for private video calls, and made sure she had access to the best possible medical care. In December 2019, 7 months after the concert, Sophie's doctors announced that her tumor had shrunk significantly and that she was responding remarkably well to treatment. While they cautioned that her condition remained serious, they were more optimistic than they had been since her initial diagnosis. Sophie celebrated the news by recording a video of herself playing Layla on the guitar Eric had sent her. The video, which her parents shared on social media, showed a little girl who was still fighting for her life, but who had found strength, joy, and hope through music. In February 2022, almost 3 years after that night at the Royal Albert Hall, Sophie was declared cancer-free. She was 12 years old, healthy, and still playing guitar every day. Eric Clapton flew to Manchester to celebrate with Sophie and her family. He brought his guitar, and they spent an afternoon playing music together in the Martinez family's living room, not as a rock star and a fan, but as two musicians who had shared an extraordinary moment and formed an unbreakable bond. The Sophie Foundation, established in her honor, has since funded research into pediatric cancer treatments and has provided musical instruments and lessons to children in hospitals around the world. Every year on May 17th, the anniversary of that unforgettable concert, Eric Clapton posts a photo of Sophie on his social media accounts with the message, "Remember, music is love made audible." And Sophie, now a healthy teenager who still dreams of becoming a professional musician someday, practices guitar every day, never forgetting the night when her hero proved that sometimes the most powerful performance is simply recognizing another human being's courage and responding with kindness. Sometimes a song really can save a life, and sometimes all it takes is someone caring enough to stop and really listen.